My name is Talia, and I'm 29 years old. For as long as I can remember, people have mocked the way I write. It started when I was just a kid, maybe 6 or 7, sitting at my grandmother's wooden kitchen table, struggling to form the perfect letters. While other kids wrote neatly between the lines, my letters danced crooked, tilted, and full of strange curls that even I couldn't always explain. I remember my teacher once holding up one of my assignments in front of the whole class and laughing, saying, "This looks like hieroglyphics." The room burst into giggles. I didn't cry then, but that day I learned something. My handwriting wasn't just words, it was me, and apparently, me wasn't good enough. As I grew older, my handwriting became something of a mystery even to myself. It shifted moods like I did, sometimes flowing like water, sometimes sharp and jagged, full of emotion I didn't dare speak out loud. When I was angry, the letters leaned too far to the right. When I was heartbroken, they slanted down like falling rain. My friends stopped borrowing my notes in high school because they said they couldn't read them. Teachers assumed I didn't care enough to write properly. But secretly, I loved my writing. When I was 15, I started journaling every night. The pages of those notebooks became my sanctuary. My handwriting evolved into something more, part script, part art, part code. I started experimenting with ways to hide messages inside the loops and spaces between letters. I taught myself a sort of personal encryption, one that no one else could decode. To the world, it looked messy. To me, it was language in its purest form, emotional, alive, and utterly mine. By the time I reached adulthood, I had developed a strange relationship with my pen. I used it as armor. I wrote everything down, people's words, expressions, tiny lies, things they thought I didn't notice. Writing helped me process the world's cruelty. Every time someone mocked me, I wrote about it. Every betrayal had a page. Every secret I discovered found its place in ink. My handwriting, ugly to others, became the only honest thing in my life. When I got the job at Mather & Co., a well-known law firm downtown, I thought things would finally change. It felt like validation proof that I was capable, intelligent, and professional. I remember walking into that glass building on my first day, my hands trembling with excitement. I was hired as an assistant to one of the senior partners, Jenna Mather, who was known for her ruthless precision and sharp wit. I admired her at first. She seemed like everything I wanted to be: strong, respected, untouchable. But admiration has a short lifespan in places built on ego. From the first week, I noticed the glances. Coworkers looked at my notes during meetings, whispering. My handwriting drew the same ridicule it always had. Someone even left a sticky note on my desk one morning that said, "Did a doctor write this?" With a little laughing face. I smiled when I saw it, tore it up quietly, and tucked it into my bag. I'd long since learned not to react outwardly. But that night, I wrote about it in my journal, word for word, emotion for emotion. Jenna herself wasn't much better. During a staff meeting one afternoon, I handed her a summary I'd written of a client's deposition. She skimmed it for a few seconds before letting out a sarcastic laugh. "Talia, are you sure this isn't written in another language?" she said. The room erupted in laughter. I wanted to disappear, but I just nodded and took the papers back. "I'll retype it," I said softly. But inside, I promised myself something: I wouldn't let her get away with that. That evening, as the office emptied, I stayed late. I watched the city lights flicker against the windows as I recopied the deposition, this time in my handwriting, perfectly legible, deliberately beautiful. Each stroke was deliberate, elegant, powerful. It wasn't for her eyes this time, it was for mine. I kept the original in my journal. That was the first night I started recording everything. Every conversation, every file I touched, every whispered comment, I wrote it all down in my unique, twisted script. I didn't realize it then, but those journals would become more than memories, they would become evidence. Working at Mather & Co. opened my eyes to things I'd never seen before. I began noticing inconsistencies in contracts, missing pages, altered signatures. Sometimes I'd compare notes between meetings and realize numbers didn't add up. When I asked questions, Jenna would brush me off with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Focus on your typing, Talia. Leave the real work to the lawyers." But I didn't stop noticing. I couldn't. Every time something felt wrong, I wrote it down. At first, it was just habit, the same instinct that had guided me since childhood. But the more I wrote, the more I saw patterns that didn't make sense unless someone was doing something intentionally. I began hiding my journals in plain sight inside old file boxes labeled archived. No one looked there. No one cared about the messy notes girl. That invisibility, which had once been my curse, became my protection. People say handwriting reveals who you are. If that's true, mine revealed someone they never expected, someone watching, remembering, and recording. And in the end, the same handwriting they mocked, the same pen they laughed at, would become the instrument of their downfall. The first day I stepped into Mather & Co., I thought I'd found my dream job, but dreams can sour fast. The office was sleek, modern, and intimidating. Everything smelled of polished ambition. Glass walls, expensive perfume, and coffee that cost more than my lunch. I remember clutching my notebook tightly, the one with my initials embossed in silver. My stomach churned with nerves, but I told myself this was it, my chance to prove that I belonged somewhere, even if my handwriting wasn't perfect. Jenna's office was at the far end of the floor, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Her name was etched in gold on the door. Jenna Mather, senior partner. She looked exactly like someone whose name belonged in gold, immaculate suit, flawless hair, the kind of confidence that made everyone else feel 2 inches shorter. She didn't look up when I entered. "You're the new assistant, right? Talia, something?" "Talia Gray," I said softly. "Right, I hope you're organized. Around here we don't have time for mistakes." I assured her I was, and that I'd do my best. She just gave a thin smile and gestured toward a stack of files taller than my arm. "Good, because you'll need to start proving it today." I got to work, sorting documents and taking notes during client meetings. Jenna spoke quickly, words slicing through the air like blades, and I scribbled down every detail I could. My handwriting flowed fast, almost instinctively. It was the only way I could keep up. By the end of that first week, I'd already noticed how different I was from the rest of the staff. Everyone there seemed to share an unspoken rhythm, dress the same, talk the same, even type the same. I was the outlier, the one who still preferred pen and paper over digital notes. It didn't take long for people to start noticing. During a Monday briefing, I passed around my handwritten notes to help summarize a case discussion. One of the junior associates, Kelsey, squinted at the page and laughed. "Wow, Talia, do you write in code or something?" The others chuckled, and even Jenna smirked. "She's got her own language," she said. "Maybe one day she'll teach us how to read it." The laughter spread, sharp and echoing. I forced a polite smile and collected the papers back, pretending it didn't sting. But that night, I went home and wrote every single word they'd said in my journal. My handwriting was messy from anger. Letters sharp and angry like shards of glass. Still, I stayed. Because beneath the humiliation, something in me was watching, learning. I began noticing small irregularities in the office, the way files would disappear for days and then reappear edited. The way Jenna's assistant before me had quit suddenly and refused to talk about it. There were whispers of favoritism, missing payments, and adjusted documents, but no one dared to say anything aloud. Then there was Jenna herself. She had this strange ability to make people feel both important and insignificant at the same time. One moment she'd compliment your work, the next she'd humiliate you in front of everyone for a typo. She ruled with fear wrapped in charm. Once, she called me into her office late one evening. She was alone, sipping wine by her desk, the skyline glowing behind her. "Do you know why I hired you, Talia?" she asked. I hesitated. "Because I'm efficient?" She smirked. "No, because you're quiet. You don't talk much, you don't ask too many questions. You're safe." The way she said safe made my skin crawl. I forced a small smile. "I try to focus on my work." "Good," she said, swirling her wine. "Keep it that way." That night, as I left her office, I caught a glimpse of a document on her desk. It was marked Confidential Client 0487. The signature line was blank. But I recognized the name. It belonged to a man who'd just been accused of corporate fraud. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I wrote everything down, what she'd said, what I'd seen, even the smell of her wine. My handwriting was steady, deliberate. It felt like instinct, like I was documenting something that would matter later, even if I didn't yet know why. The following weeks were worse. The teasing grew bolder. Someone left a fake note on my desk, written in deliberately messy handwriting that said, "Maybe take a calligraphy class, Talia." Jenna laughed when she saw it. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was observant. During one particularly stressful week, Jenna accidentally left her planner in the break room. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Inside were scribbled numbers, names, and symbols that didn't make sense at first. But then I noticed something chilling. Client names from cases that had already been closed, circled, and annotated with dates and dollar signs. Something was wrong at Mather & Co. Very wrong. And as I stared at those pages, it hit me, everyone thought my handwriting was useless. Unprofessional, childish. But mine was honest. I never used it to deceive, only to remember. Theirs, however, theirs was a tool for lies. I decided then and there that if they wanted to mock my handwriting, I'd give them a reason to remember it. I'd write everything, the truth, the secrets, the corruption hiding behind those pristine office walls. Every late night I stayed behind. I filled my notebooks with details no one else cared about. Phone calls, document codes, timestamps. My writing became sharper, faster, more precise. I didn't even realize how deep I was going until one night, flipping through the pages, I realized something. I wasn't just keeping notes, I was building a case. The handwriting they mocked was documenting their crimes. And someday soon, those same people who laughed at my scribbles would find out that every single letter I wrote was another line of their downfall. And I couldn't wait to watch them try to read their own destruction, written in my hand. I wasn't even supposed to be there that night, but I was, and everything changed. It was the firm's annual networking gala, an extravagant event reserved for senior partners, top clients, and select staff. Assistants like me usually stayed behind, handling the leftover paperwork. But that year, Jenna insisted I come along. "We'll need someone to take notes," she said casually, as if I were nothing more than office furniture. The invitation felt more like a command than an honor. Still, I agreed. Maybe part of me wanted to see the world that existed beyond the cubicles, the glittering world I worked so hard to support but was never really part of. I remember standing in front of my mirror that evening, staring at the black dress I'd borrowed from my sister. It was simple, understated, the kind of dress meant to blend in rather than stand out. I told myself that was fine. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to observe. The event was held at the Carlton Plaza Hotel, a place so luxurious that even the air smelled expensive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain, and laughter echoed off marble floors. Everyone looked perfect, designer suits, diamond earrings, practiced smiles. I felt like an intruder. Jenna was already there when I arrived, dazzling in a silver gown that shimmered like liquid metal. She was surrounded by clients, laughing, touching shoulders, performing confidence like an art form. When she spotted me, she raised an eyebrow. "Oh, good. You made it," she said, her tone dripping with disinterest. "Try to look like you belong, huh?" I nodded quietly and retreated to a corner, notepad in hand. The night unfolded slowly. Waiters glided between tables, the band played soft jazz, and champagne flowed like water. I watched as partners schmoozed clients, their voices honeyed with insincerity. Every conversation was a transaction, every laugh a calculation. I scribbled my observations quietly in my notebook, old habit, I guess. That's when I noticed Kelsey, standing by the bar with two of our colleagues. She was mimicking something with her hands, and it took me a moment to realize what she was doing. She was pretending to write in my handwriting. Her movements were exaggerated, sloppy, comical. The others burst into laughter. Jenna joined them moments later, leaning in to see what was so funny. Kelsey whispered something to her, and they both looked at me across the room. Jenna smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that always meant danger. "You should see this," she said loudly enough for others to hear. Apparently, Talia writes in riddles. The group laughed again. My cheeks burned, but I didn't move. I'd learned long ago that humiliation loses power when you don't feed it. Instead, I took a slow sip of my drink and pretended to jot something down in my notebook, even though my hand trembled slightly. After a while, the laughter died down, replaced by the hum of new conversations. I decided to slip away for a moment, needing air more than dignity. The hotel's balcony overlooked the city streets glimmering with headlights, the skyline stretching endlessly. I leaned against the railing, trying to breathe. That's when I heard voices. They were faint at first, coming from just inside the open balcony door. Jenna's voice was unmistakable, sharp, confident, dripping with arrogance. "Listen, I told you the documents are handled. No one will ever trace it back," she said. My heart stilled. A man's voice answered. Lower. Nervous. "But what if the client's lawyers ask for originals? You can't fake a federal filing." Jenna laughed softly. "That's what interns are for. And if something goes missing, it's on them, not us." I froze, the pen in my hand hovering midair. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I couldn't stop. Jenna continued, "As long as the paperwork looks legitimate, no one questions the details. Besides, I have a signature guy. He makes the documents look like the originals." The man sighed heavily. "You're playing with fire, Jenna." She took a sip of her drink and said, "Then let it burn as long as I control the match." I didn't move. My mind was racing. They were talking about forgery. Maybe fraud. And this wasn't idle gossip, it was strategy. This was real. I started writing everything down, every word, every pause, every tone. My handwriting flew across the page, messy but precise. Years of being mocked had trained me for this moment. I could record fast, silently, accurately. I had no idea how much power those words would carry later. Suddenly, the conversation stopped. I heard footsteps approaching the balcony, and before I could hide, Jenna stepped out. Her eyes found me instantly. "Well," she said slowly, her tone casual but her expression sharp, "look who's eavesdropping." I stammered, trying to sound innocent. I just came out for air." Her gaze dropped to my notebook. "Taking notes?" she asked, smiling in a way that made my blood run cold. "I was just—" She held up a hand. "Relax, Talia. No need to explain." Her smile widened. "You always have that little notebook, don't you? I hope you're not writing about me." Her words were teasing, but her eyes weren't. There was a warning there, one I couldn't afford to ignore. "I just like to stay organized," I said quietly. "Of course," she replied smoothly, turning to look out over the city. "Just remember, some things are better left unwritten." She walked away, her perfume lingering in the cold night air. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. Then I looked down at my notebook, at the pages filled with the conversation I'd just overheard. I knew I should have torn them out, destroyed them, pretended none of it happened. But I couldn't. Something in me knew this was important, so I closed the notebook, slipped it into my purse, and walked back into the golden glow of the ballroom, pretending everything was fine. But I wasn't fine. Because for the first time, my handwriting wasn't just a habit or a comfort, it was evidence. And as I glanced across the room and saw Jenna smiling, effortlessly among her clients, I knew one thing for certain. She had just written her own downfall, I'd merely signed it for her. The next morning, my world collapsed, or so they thought. I remember walking into the office with my usual calm, a cup of coffee in one hand and my notebook in the other. The night before, I had barely slept. My mind kept replaying Jenna's words from the balcony, her laugh, her arrogance, her threat. I told myself to stay composed, to act as if nothing had happened. But the moment I stepped through the glass doors, I sensed something was off. The air was too quiet, too heavy. People whispered in corners, glancing at me and then quickly looking away. Even the receptionist avoided eye contact. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to walk to my desk. That's when HR manager Lyle appeared beside me. his expression grim. "Talia, Jenna wants to see you in conference room B," he said. His tone was clipped, impersonal. My hands grew cold. I followed him down the hall, my heels echoing against the tile. Jenna was already there, sitting at the head of the table, perfectly composed. A stack of folders sat neatly in front of her, and beside her was a woman from HR I didn't recognize, taking notes on a laptop. "Have a seat, Talia," Jenna said sweetly. Too sweetly. Saturday, the fluorescent lights buzzed above us. Jenna folded her hands. "We've had an incident," she began. "It's been brought to our attention that some confidential client information has been leaked outside the firm." My heart dropped. "Leaked? I don't..." She held up a hand. "Please, let me finish." Her tone hardened. "We traced the source of the leak to files handled by you. In fact, your notes," she tapped the folders, "were found in an unauthorized location. Care to explain?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. "My notes? That's impossible. I've never shared anything with anyone." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said she'd already decided I was guilty. "Funny you should say that, because these documents," she opened one of the folders and slid it toward me, "were written in your handwriting." My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at the papers. They were filled with text, my looping letters, my distinctive slant. The very handwriting everyone had mocked. Except, these weren't my notes. I'd never written them. "These are forgeries," I said quietly. "Are they?" Jenna arched an eyebrow. "Our analysts say otherwise. The resemblance is uncanny." I could barely think. My mind raced through every possibility. Someone had copied my handwriting painstakingly, maliciously. I'd always known it was unique, but now that uniqueness had been turned into a weapon. "I didn't write these," I repeated, more firmly. Jenna leaned back, crossing her legs. "Then how do you explain the content?" "They contain specific case details only you would have access to." "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "Maybe someone..." "Someone?" She interrupted smoothly. "Someone broke into your files? Used your exact handwriting? Convenient." Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I realized then what this was. It wasn't an accusation, it was a setup. The HR woman cleared her throat. "Talia, given the seriousness of the allegations, the firm has decided to place you on immediate suspension pending further investigation." The room began to blur. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, my pulse hammering. "You can't just..." Jenna cut me off again. "We can, and we will. You've breached confidentiality. That's grounds for termination and possible legal action." Her voice was smooth, professional, rehearsed. I could tell she'd planned this. I stood slowly, clutching the edge of the table. "You know I didn't do this." Jenna met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "I know what the evidence says." That's when I saw it, just a flicker. The tiniest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She was enjoying this. I left the room numb, barely hearing the words Lyle said as he escorted me out. People stared as I passed, whispering. I felt exposed, humiliated, stripped of the little dignity I'd managed to hold on to. When the elevator doors closed, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored wall, pale, shaken, furious. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the realization that Jenna had beaten me, at least for now. When I got home, I sat on the floor of my small apartment, surrounded by notebooks. I opened one after another, flipping through pages of memories, of truths. Every stroke of my pen had meaning. Every mark told a story. I ran my fingers over the ink, feeling the grooves pressed into the paper. My handwriting was alive, it carried emotion, depth, things no imitation could ever capture. If Jenna had forged my handwriting, she'd underestimated one thing. I knew my script like my own heartbeat. The angle of the loops, the pressure of the strokes, the rhythm of my pen. It was my fingerprint. And I could prove it. That night, I began scanning my old journals, comparing them line by line with the evidence the firm claimed was mine. I saw differences, subtle ones that only I could recognize. The imposter's writing was perfect, too perfect. It lacked the natural imperfections that came from real emotion. I saved everything, every image, every comparison. I labeled and cataloged them meticulously. For once, my obsession with documentation would serve me well. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight back. They thought they'd buried me, that I'd crumble under their lies. But I'd been underestimated my whole life because of my handwriting, my quietness, my patience. They didn't understand that silence isn't weakness, it's calculation. And as I stared at the pages spread out before me, my truth against their lies, I made myself a promise. If Jenna wanted a war written in ink, I'd give her one. And this time, every letter would spell her end. 3 weeks later, I walked back into that office not as a victim, but as a ghost. They expected me to be broken, humiliated, desperate, pleading for mercy. Instead, I came back quiet, controlled, and armed with something they'd never seen coming: patience. I had left the firm the day HR suspended me without a word, but I didn't leave town. I moved into the shadow of the break they'd forced on me. For 21 days, I lived like a scavenger of truth. I slept little and read everything: court filings, public records, old case notes I'd copied before they'd tried to pin forgeries on me. I called former clients who'd been shuffled out of Mather & Co. quietly, on burner phones and under the pretense of offering handwriting help or archive retrieval. Most hung up when they heard my voice at first after being threatened by the firm. People were scared, but a few, the ones who'd been hurt the worst, listened. They told me things I'd only suspected: invoices that ballooned overnight, declarations that had mysteriously lost pages, signatures that looked okay from a distance but were wrong up close. Little lies sewn into big cases. They were embarrassed, ashamed, but their anger burned bright once I gave them a place to put it. I started with letters. Real paper, real ink, the kind that can't be deleted or altered with a keystroke. I wrote to clients, to former interns, to minor partners who had quietly been pushed aside. Each letter was short, precise, and delivered in a way that felt intimate and impossible to ignore. Slipped into briefcases, left on doormats, mailed with stamps and no return address. I used my handwriting deliberately, my loops, my slants, the tiny flourish on my lowercase g. I wanted them to know who was behind it, but not yet how far I'd been. Watching. I also wrote to people the firm had wronged, publicly, victims whose cases had been quietly settled or buried. Those letters contained clear, simple facts and a quiet accusation. Someone at Mather & Co. had worked to hide evidence. I didn't publish proofs. I didn't need to. Just the suggestion, coming in my hand, was enough to seed doubt. Each letter ended the same way. My personal phrase, the one nobody else used. I signed them, as always, with the words, "Signed in truth." It read like a signature and felt like a dare. The reaction was slower than I expected, but inevitable. A client called their new counsel and mentioned my note. The counsel, worried about malpractice, asked for an audit. A former intern texted a friend at a district attorney's office and forwarded a photo of my handwriting. An embarrassed partner called a client to smooth things over and was met with quiet fury. Rumors, like oil on water, began to spread in circles I couldn't have reached alone. Back at Mather & Co., the first ripples were small, partners whispered. Jenna, who'd been so sure of herself when she'd watched me escorted from the building, started taking more calls behind closed doors. Her calmness looked thinner with each passing day. She'd lost that buttery certainty that made others defer to her. I watched her in the lobby one morning from the safety of a coffee shop across the street, her shoulders tight, eyes darting, her hand clenched around her phone like a lifeline. I could have done the dramatic thing, marched back in and demanded apologies, but I'd learned that spectacle belonged to them. They were good at theatrics. I was better at precision. So I continued to write. I targeted specific people, those whose small betrayals had facilitated bigger crimes. I left a note on a junior partner's car about a missing amendment. I mailed an envelope to a long-ignored client with photocopies of invoices that didn't match bank statements. I made sure each note landed where it would cause the most unease, then retreated into my anonymity. Sometimes I imagined Jenna at her kitchen table, eyes skimming the letters she hadn't expected to find, fingers trembling as she realized the pattern. The idea made me feel less small. It wasn't just revenge, it was repair. I was returning stolen truth to the people it had been taken from. The firm's PR team began to panic when a respected local attorney called for an internal audit after receiving one of my letters. The partners held emergency meetings. Emails flew. Piano wire silence replaced casual lunches. Rumors that once would have been contained were now creeping into the wrong ears: reporters, prosecutors, compliance officers. When a client demanded an explanation and threatened to withdraw, the partners finally stopped pretending. They convened, strategized, and tried to control a narrative that had already slipped through their fingers. My name wasn't mentioned in those closed-door conversations, not openly. But they were discussing handwriting. They were discussing signatures. They were, for the first time, forced to read their own files with suspicion, a task they'd always left to me and my notebooks. As the inquiries multiplied, so did the anxiety. People who had once laughed at my scribbles began to check their pens before signing a page. One night, as rain hammered the window of my small apartment, I opened my journal and reread all the notes I'd made since the suspension. Each line felt like a small victory. I'd kept my promise to myself. I was not their victim. I was an archivist of truth. I had turned my supposed weakness into armor, and their arrogance into an open wound. By then, the whispers in the firm had mutated into something sharper: questions aimed directly at Jenna. The partners wanted answers. And when no satisfying explanation appeared, panic grew like mold. It was slow, surgical, and utterly satisfying. By the time Jenna realized who was behind it, it was far too late. When power is built on lies, even a shaky pen stroke can bring it down. The first sign that the fortress of Mather & Co. was starting to crack came quietly: an email that wasn't meant for me. It was forwarded by accident, an internal thread between partners discussing client concerns and possible document discrepancies. My name wasn't mentioned, but the subject line made my chest tighten. Handwriting consistency reports. They were investigating themselves. My letters had worked. By that point, 3 major clients had pulled out, 2 had requested audits, and 1 had filed a formal complaint about falsified contracts. The office that once laughed at my handwriting now whispered about it like it was a ghost story. Some claimed I was behind everything. Others thought I was a scapegoat. The truth was simpler and more dangerous: I was both. It didn't take long before Jenna started calling me again. At first, it was the same sharp tone she used to use when demanding reports. "Enough, Talia," her voicemail hissed. "You've made your point. Let's settle this quietly before you ruin your career." I didn't respond. A week later, her tone changed. "Please, just call me. We can talk about reinstating you. Maybe even compensation." I still said nothing. My silence was louder than anything I could write. But Jenna wasn't the only one panicking. Kelsey, the woman who'd mocked my handwriting at the gala, began reaching out too. Her messages came at odd hours, short, nervous bursts. "Did you send something to the journalist? They're asking questions about me." I didn't answer her either. I had already been in contact with the journalist. She mentioned a man named Darren Holt, a quiet reporter known for dismantling corporate frauds with precision. I hadn't given him everything yet, only enough to make him curious. I met him once, late at night, in a corner booth of a downtown cafe. I handed him an envelope filled with copies of the firm's falsified pages, and a few of my own handwritten notes detailing what I'd witnessed. He flipped through the papers slowly, his brows lifting. "You documented all of this by hand?" "Yes," I said. "It's the only way I trust the truth to stay pure." He nodded thoughtfully. "You realize, if this is real, it's explosive." "It's real," I replied. "Every stroke of that pen was drawn while I was being humiliated by the people who wrote those lies." For the next 2 weeks, we stayed in touch as he verified everything. I knew it wouldn't be long before the story broke, and when it did, it would tear through Mather & Co. like a hurricane. Meanwhile, Jenna's control began to unravel. Partners started questioning her decisions. One of them, Mr. Callahan, an older partner who'd always been loyal, resigned abruptly. Staff turnover tripled. The firm's once pristine reputation began to rot from the inside. One night, unable to resist the temptation, I called the office line. It was late, and I knew Jenna would still be there. When she picked up, her voice was strained, brittle. "Talia?" she said cautiously. "Hello, Jenna," I replied softly. There was a pause. "You have no idea what you've done." "Oh, I think I do," I said. "You built your empire on forged lines. I just made sure everyone could read them." She inhaled sharply. "You're destroying innocent people in the process." "Innocent?" I asked, my voice calm. "Like the interns you blamed for your mistakes? Or the clients you overcharged? Tell me, Jenna, how many lives did you ruin before you ever noticed my handwriting?" For once, she didn't have a quick comeback. Just a quiet, seething silence. "Finally," she whispered. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I said. "For years. But not anymore." Then, I hung up. That was the last time we ever spoke. The next morning, Darren's article went live. The headline was brutal. "Inside Mather & Co. How Forged Handwriting and Faked Signatures Propped Up a Legal Empire." Within hours, it spread across every major news outlet. The article named Jenna directly. It mentioned whistleblowers, forged client signatures, falsified documents, all backed by evidence written in distinctive, verifiable handwriting provided by a former employee. That handwriting, of course, was mine. By afternoon, the firm's phone lines were jammed. Reporters crowded the lobby. Clients demanded answers. Partners locked themselves in meeting rooms, trying to salvage whatever was left. Jenna didn't show up that day or the next. I watched it all unfold from home, a silent witness to the chaos I'd created. My phone buzzed constantly, unknown numbers, messages, offers for interviews. I ignored them all. I didn't need publicity. I didn't need applause. I just wanted them to feel what I'd felt: small, powerless, mocked, and exposed. And they did. Kelsey eventually tried to save herself by leaking additional files to the press, but she was too late. Her betrayal only confirmed the firm's corruption. Within a week, Mather & Co. had lost nearly all its major clients. Investigations were launched. Lawyers hired lawyers. I didn't feel joy. Exactly what I felt was release. The weight I'd carried for years had finally lifted, replaced by a calm I'd never known. But victory has its own silence, one that feels both satisfying and unnerving. The night after the story broke, I sat at my desk, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote a single line. When truth is written in pain, it becomes permanent. I closed the cover and exhaled. For the first time, I wasn't writing to remember. I was writing to let go. But the story wasn't over yet. Because for people like Jenna, defeat doesn't always mean disappearance, and I knew, deep down, that the fallout had only just begun. The day the investigators walked into Mather & Co., I knew justice was unfolding. It was a crisp Monday morning when the firm's glass doors swung open and the auditors arrived: 3 men and 2 women in dark suits, faces blank, briefcases clutched like weapons. They didn't need to. The entire office felt it the moment they stepped in. The shift, the tension, the quiet panic that spread like wildfire. By noon, word had reached me through a friend still working there. The firm was under internal investigation for evidence tampering and fraud. Jenna's name was mentioned multiple times. My handwriting, ironically, was now an official point of analysis. I hadn't planned to go back, but when the investigators reached out to me directly a few days later, I knew my time in the shadows was over. They wanted to talk. They wanted to see my journals. I agreed. We met in a sterile office, downtown, neutral walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of place designed to strip emotion from conversation. The lead investigator, a woman named Agent Calloway, spoke softly but with an edge of curiosity. "You documented everything by hand?" she asked, flipping through one of my journals. "Yes," I replied. "It's the only way I trust my thoughts. Computers can be altered, ink can't." Her gaze moved over the pages, tracing my loops and slants. "Your handwriting is distinct. I smiled faintly. That's one word for it. They asked me to recount everything from the mocking at work, to the night of the party, to my suspension. I told them everything, leaving nothing out. Every detail mattered, and every page I'd written was proof that I had been watching long before they had. When I left that room, I felt both drained and alive. For the first time, someone believed me. Within weeks, the investigation deepened. Forensic handwriting experts were brought in to analyze every questionable document tied to the firm. They compared strokes, slants, pressure points. My real handwriting became the control sample, the truth by which all the lies were measured. And the results were damning. They found at least 17 forged signatures across multiple client files. Contracts altered after signing. Pages replaced, dates changed. Each falsification traced back to one office, Jenna's. When the news broke internally, chaos followed. Employees were questioned, computers seized, paper files locked up. Some staff members quit on the spot. Others broke down crying in the hallways, realizing their futures were tied to a sinking ship. From a distance, I watched it unfold like a scene I'd already written. Every step of their collapse mirrored the notes in my journals, their arrogance, their deceit, their unraveling. Then, one morning, I got a call from Agent Calloway. "They want you to testify," she said. "Your records are crucial. You'll be our primary witness." My heart stuttered. "Testify?" "Yes. You were the one who documented everything, and your handwriting." She paused, almost smiling. "It's become the signature of truth in this case." I laughed softly, not out of humor but disbelief. All those years of ridicule, of being told my handwriting made me look unprofessional, and now, it was the reason justice was moving forward. The day of my testimony arrived gray and cold. The firm's conference room had been transformed into a temporary hearing chamber. Jenna was there, seated at the far end of the table. She looked smaller somehow, her once flawless posture replaced by exhaustion. But her eyes, those sharp, predatory eyes, still burned with defiance. As I took my seat, our gazes met. For a moment, it was just the two of us, predator and prey, though which one was which had changed. "Miss Gray," the lead attorney began, "please state your relationship to Mather & Co." "I was employed as Jenna Mather's assistant," I said. My voice was steady, to my own surprise. "I handled client records, scheduling, and documentation. And these journals," he said, gesturing to the stack beside me. "You wrote all of them yourself?" "Yes," I replied. "Every word. Can you tell us why?" I looked directly at Jenna. "Because I knew one day, someone would need to see what really happened." A murmur rippled through the room. Jenna's jaw tightened. I walked them through each piece of evidence, dates, times, conversations, and discrepancies I'd noticed. The handwriting analysts confirmed everything I said. They pointed out the subtle differences between my authentic strokes and the forged ones on the firm's documents. When they displayed the comparison on a projector, the distinction was obvious even to the untrained eye. My letters flowed naturally, emotion in every curve. The forgeries were stiff, mechanical, lifeless. Jenna's defense tried to argue that I had tampered with the evidence myself, but the timestamps on my journals, the ink aging tests, and even the indentations on the pages disproved it. By the time the session ended, the truth was undeniable. Mather & Co. had built its empire on fabricated documents and manipulated contracts. Jenna had orchestrated most of it, and my ugly handwriting had become the key to unraveling her empire. After the hearing, as I was leaving, Jenna caught up to me in the hallway. Her voice was low, trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You think this makes you a hero?" she spat. "You think anyone will remember your name?" I turned to face her. "No," I said calmly. "But they'll remember my handwriting." She froze, her lips parting in silent rage. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, the realization that she had lost control. I walked away without another word, leaving her standing there in the corridor of the building she'd once ruled. That night, I sat by my window, my journal open before me. I could hear the city, humming outside, unaware that somewhere in a courtroom downtown, justice had just been written in ink. I picked up my pen and wrote one final line for the day. For every lie she signed, I signed the truth beside it. Then I closed the book. For once, the thing they mocked was the thing that destroyed them. Facing Jenna in court felt like staring at the past I'd finally conquered. The day of the trial arrived like a storm I'd seen coming for months. The courthouse stood cold and gray against the sky, its marble steps slick from the morning rain. My heart pounded as I climbed them, clutching my leather-bound notebook, the same one that had followed me through humiliation, betrayal, and vindication. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Reporters murmured in the back rows, their cameras waiting to capture Jenna's downfall. Lawyers shuffled papers. I took my seat near the front, behind the prosecution's table. Across from me, Jenna sat flanked by her defense team, her posture perfect, her hair immaculate, her expression carefully composed. But she couldn't hide the flicker in her eyes when she saw me. It wasn't anger this time. It was fear wrapped in denial. When the judge entered, the room rose. My pulse synced with the echo of the gavel as proceedings began. The charges were read aloud. Forgery, fraud, defamation, evidence tampering. Each word felt like a stone being laid on Jenna's chest. The prosecution started strong. They outlined how falsified documents had been used to manipulate clients, alter contracts, and inflate payments. Then they began introducing the key evidence, the handwriting samples. I was called to the stand shortly after. The moment my name echoed through the courtroom, my legs went weak. But I steadied myself and walked to the witness chair. The oath felt heavier than I expected. The pen in my hand felt like an extension of everything I'd endured. Miss Gray, the prosecutor began. You were employed by the defendant, as her assistant, correct? Yes, I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. And during that time, you kept personal handwritten records of your experiences? I did, he nodded. Could you explain why? I looked at Jenna briefly before answering. Because words fade when they're spoken. But when they're written, they live. I wrote down everything to protect myself from memory, from manipulation, from people who thought they could rewrite the truth. He smiled slightly. And those records became a crucial part of this investigation, correct? Yes. My handwriting was used to verify which documents were real and which were forged. The courtroom screens came alive as enlarged images of my writing appeared beside the forged pages from Mather & Co. I could see my loops, my curves, my distinctive style, the emotion in every line. Next to it, Jenna's falsified documents looked robotic, hollow. The expert witness, a forensic handwriting analyst, took the stand next. Miss Gray's writing shows organic variation, he explained. You can see how her pressure shifts naturally with emotion. The forgeries, however, display uniformity, consistent line weight, unnatural replication. They were traced or digitally mimicked. Every sentence tightened the noose around Jenna's defense. Then came her turn. Her attorney rose, pacing deliberately before the jury. Miss Gray, he said, would you describe your relationship with my client as friendly? I almost laughed. No, I said flatly. She was my employer. Nothing more. He smiled thinly. And would it be fair to say you resented her? I resented the way she treated people, I replied, including me. So, you had motive to fabricate this story. I met his gaze calmly. If I fabricated it, you wouldn't have 17 forged signatures that don't match mine. You wouldn't have clients confirming altered contracts. You wouldn't have experts proving the forgeries weren't done by hand. The lawyer hesitated, shifting his weight. Still, one might argue that you gained from this scandal attention, sympathy. I cut him off, my voice sharp but steady. Do you think I wanted attention? Do you think I wanted to be laughed at, fired, and accused? The only thing I gained was freedom from her lies. Silence fell. Even the judge's gaze softened slightly. When my testimony ended, I stepped down, my knees trembling. But not from fear, from release. I'd said everything I needed to say. Next, Jenna was called to the stand. She rose gracefully, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her face calm. But as soon as she began speaking, the cracks showed. "I had no knowledge of any forged documents," she said confidently. "Any discrepancies must have been clerical errors or actions taken without my authorization." The prosecutor approached slowly. "Miss Mather, do you recognize this document?" He held up a contract with her initials. Her lips twitched. "Yes." "And this signature?" "It appears to be mine. Except it's not," the prosecutor said. "Our analysis shows it was copied from another file, digitally altered and inserted into this document. Do you know who did that?" Jenna's throat moved as she swallowed. "I can't say." "Can't or won't." Her mask cracked for a split second. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor didn't stop there. "And do you recognize this handwriting?" He held up one of my original notes from the party night, written in my unmistakable script. "These are the observations of your assistant, the same assistant you mocked, humiliated, and tried to frame." Jenna's face went pale. She didn't answer. The silence stretched, thick and painful. When the verdict came days later, it was swift and devastating. Guilty on multiple counts of fraud and evidence tampering. The firm, once a monument to prestige, was ordered to dissolve. Jenna's law license was suspended indefinitely pending criminal sentencing. I sat in the back of the courtroom as the words sank in. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Deeply, quietly, for what felt like the first time in years. As Jenna was let out, she glanced at me one last time. There was no hatred in her eyes anymore, only disbelief. The woman who'd once mocked my handwriting had been undone by it. I stood slowly, closed my notebook, and whispered to myself, "Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be written." Walking out of that courthouse, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale, washed clean, and I felt the same way. But even victory has a shadow, and somewhere deep down, I could feel one following me still. After the verdict, I found myself holding the first letter I ever wrote, the one that began everything. The courtroom had emptied hours ago, but I still sat there long after everyone left, listening to the echo of my own heartbeat. Papers rustled faintly in my lap, court copies, verdict sheets, witness statements. They didn't feel real yet. I'd spent months imagining this moment, fantasizing about it, writing it out in my journals, each version more vivid than the last. But the reality was quieter. There were no fireworks, no applause, just silence. I walked outside, the late afternoon light stretching across the courthouse steps. The city bustled around me, indifferent, unaware that my entire world had just shifted. I took a deep breath, pulled my coat tighter, and made my way home. My apartment felt strange when I entered, as if the walls had been waiting for me. Dust motes swirled in the golden light, dancing through the air like confetti that no one had thrown. I dropped my bag on the floor and sank onto the couch. For a long while, I just sat there, staring at the shelves lined with my old journals. Each one was labeled neatly dates, months, chapters of my life. My past, ink-bound and heavy. I reached for the oldest one, its corners frayed from years of handling. It was the very first notebook I ever filled. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fell to the floor. I picked it up, and my breath caught when I saw the handwriting. It was mine, but smaller, rounder, more naive. The date on the top corner read, "The 3rd of February 2007. I was 14. The letter was addressed to myself. I unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling like old firewood. The words were shaky, uncertain, but sincere. "Dear Talia, promise me you'll never stop writing, no matter what people say. Your words are yours, your handwriting is yours. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of it. Asterisk, love, you." I sat there frozen, reading it again and again until the ink blurred. I could almost see that version of me, awkward, insecure, sitting at my grandmother's table, clutching a cheap blue pen, trying to convince herself that she mattered. That letter, that fragile piece of hope written by a teenage girl who hadn't yet learned how cruel the world could be, had somehow survived all this time. I realized, with a lump in my throat, That this was where it had all started. Not the revenge, not the downfall, but the reason behind everything. Writing had always been my anchor. It was my way of saying, I exist, even when people laughed, even when they dismissed me, even when my own boss tried to erase me. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of anger, they were of release. I sat there for hours, lost in memory, replaying the journey that had led me here. The little girl who loved her pen, the woman who was mocked for it, the employee who was framed, the whistleblower who wrote her way to justice. It all connected each page of my life leading to this one. By nightfall, the city lights blinked through my window. I stood, walked to my desk, and pulled out a matchbox from the drawer. I struck a match, its flame trembling like a heartbeat. I held the old letter over a metal tray and whispered, "You kept your promise." The fire caught the paper gently, curling it inward until it was nothing but smoke and ash. I didn't burn it out of anger. I burned it because I didn't need it anymore. That little girl had done her job. She'd protected me. Now it was time to let her rest. As the last ember faded, I opened a fresh page in my current journal. My handwriting flowed easily, confident and unrestrained. Justice doesn't end with punishment, it ends with peace. I paused, staring at the words. For the first time, my handwriting didn't feel like a secret or a shield. It felt like freedom. In the weeks that followed, I slowly began rebuilding. I took on small freelance transcription jobs, honest work, quiet work. I found comfort in routine, in ink and paper and the rhythmic sound of my pen scratching across the page. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself glancing toward the mailbox outside my window. Habit, I suppose. For months, it had only brought bills or advertisements. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that my story, our story, wasn't finished yet. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the glass, I was journaling when I heard the metallic clink of the mailbox lid outside. My stomach tightened. It was nearly midnight. Curious, I slipped on my coat, went downstairs, and opened the box. Inside was a single envelope, no return address, no stamp. Just my name, written in handwriting that looked hauntingly familiar. I froze. The letters were perfect, too perfect. The same loops, the same strokes, the same elegant precision that only I should have been capable of. My throat went dry as I turned the envelope over, sealed with wax. My pulse quickened. I tore it open and unfolded the letter. There, in handwriting that mirrored mine almost exactly, were 5 chilling words. "You're not the only one." The paper trembled in my hand. I stared at the ink, my heart pounding louder with every passing second. Someone had copied me. Someone had studied me. And someone wanted me to know it. I stepped back, my mind spinning. The fire of vengeance had finally burned out of my life, or so I thought. But now, as I held that eerie letter, the flames flickered alive again, licking at the edges of my calm. Because just when I thought my story had ended, another hand had begun writing it. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but the moment I saw the handwriting, my stomach dropped. I must have read that letter a dozen times that night, pacing my small apartment like a caged animal. The words danced on the page, mocking me. "You're not the only one." The ink looked identical to mine, same slant, same rhythm, even the same way I looped my lowercase y, but it wasn't me. I knew every flaw, every variation in my penmanship, every twitch of emotion that made it human. This was mechanical, cold, calculated. I tried to convince myself it was some cruel prank. Maybe someone from the firm had decided to toy with me, someone angry about the fallout. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The paper wasn't standard printer paper. It was the same cream-colored stationery I used for my personal letters. The kind I'd ordered online months ago. I kept it locked in my desk drawer. I went to check. The box was there but lighter. I counted. 2 sheets were missing. Someone had been in my apartment. For the first time since Jenna's downfall, real fear crept into me. The kind of fear that hums beneath the skin, whispering that you're being watched. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me flinch: the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. I sat at my desk, staring at the letter, studying every line like it held a secret message. Whoever had written it wasn't just mimicking my handwriting, they were challenging me. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to believe it was over. But the next morning, a second envelope appeared. This time, it was slid under my door. No stamp. No address. Just my name again. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was the same, but the message was different. Truth doesn't belong to one person. That was the phrase I'd written in my own journal months ago, the one sentence I'd never shown to anyone. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. How could they know that? I pulled out all my journals, flipping through them, desperate to find missing pages or signs of intrusion. Nothing. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But still, someone knew. Someone had seen my words. The only people who'd had access to my handwriting during the investigation were the forensic analysts, the lawyers, and the journalist Darren Holt. My chest tightened. Darren had photographed my journals for evidence. He had my scans, my samples, my notes. He'd even commented once about how distinct and emotional my writing looked. At the time, I thought it was admiration. Now, I wasn't sure. I sent him a message. Darren, did you send me something? A letter? No reply. I waited an hour. Then another. By evening, I sent a second message. Nothing. The next day, I received a third envelope. This one didn't contain words, just a single photocopy. It was a page from one of my old journals, the one I'd burned after the trial. The edges were blackened, but the words were still visible. Some people deserve to have their lies signed in truth. That page should have been ashes. Yet here it was, resurrected and mailed back to me like a taunt. I finally broke. I went to the police. They were polite, but dismissive. The officer at the desk skimmed the letters and sighed. "There's no direct threat here," he said. "No demand, no explicit harm. It's unsettling, sure, but not criminal." I wanted to scream. "Someone broke into my apartment, they stole my stationery." He raised an eyebrow. "Any signs of forced entry?" "None." He handed the letters back, shrugging. "Then there's not much we can do, ma'am. Maybe install a camera. Keep a record." Record. The word lingered. I had always kept records. That was my strength. That night, I did exactly that. I set up a small camera near my door and another by my desk. I double-locked every window and checked them twice. Then I sat down and started writing, not in my journal, but on loose sheets of paper. I wrote everything that had happened since the verdict. The first letter, the missing stationery, the copies of my words. I detailed it all meticulously. As if writing could make me safe again. It didn't. 3 nights later, I woke up to a soft thud from my balcony. My heart hammered. I crept toward the sound, every step careful, quiet. When I pulled back the curtain, the balcony was empty. But taped to the glass door was another envelope. My name, my handwriting. I opened it slowly. "You taught me well." The letters swam in my vision. I stumbled back, my knees weak. Whoever this was, they weren't mocking me anymore. They were becoming me. I scanned the footage from my camera the next morning. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the motion sensor flickered. A shadow moved across the balcony. No face, no features, just a dark figure. They approached the glass, pressed something against it, then disappeared into the night. The police hadn't believed me before. I doubted they would now. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the letters, my own handwriting staring back at me from every direction. It felt like I was drowning in versions of myself, some real, some counterfeit. I thought I had ended the story of Mather and Co. I thought I had burned the lies and signed the truth, but now someone else had picked up the pen. And as I stared at the latest letter under the dim light of my lamp, I realized with a cold certainty, the war of ink and deception wasn't over, it had only changed hands. I didn't know who they were, but they knew me. down to every stroke of my pen. Days blurred into each other after that night on the balcony. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator made my skin crawl. I started sleeping on the couch with my phone in hand, the letters laid out across the coffee table like pieces of evidence. My apartment, once my safe place, had turned into a crime scene I couldn't escape. The police had dismissed me, friends avoided me, and the only person who might have understood Darren Holt, the journalist, had gone silent. I left him 3 voicemails, sent half a dozen emails, even dropped by the paper's office, but no one had seen him for weeks. On assignment, his editor said. But there was something odd in her tone, like she didn't fully believe it herself. Whoever was sending these letters wanted me isolated, and it was working. The messages kept coming. Each one was more personal, more invasive. The handwriting was flawless mine, but not mine. Every imperfection I'd ever had, every quirk of my loops and slants, replicated with eerie precision. But I started noticing something small, something only I would catch. The pressure. Real handwriting breathes, it dips, it surges. It leaves faint shadows where the pen hesitates. These letters were too consistent. No variation in ink density, no telltale pauses. Whoever was doing this wasn't writing, they were copying. Printing. One night, I spread all the letters on my table and studied them side by side. The ink shimmered faintly when I tilted the paper toward the light. Laser printer residue. The letters weren't written, they were scanned and reproduced. Someone had digitized my handwriting. The realization hit me so hard I had to sit down. The only place that had high-resolution scans of my writing was during the investigation, the law office's evidence archive, and the journalist's encrypted case files. Jenna was in prison. The firm was gone. That left only one possibility. Darren. He had access to everything. He'd photographed every page of my journals for his article. I'd trusted him. I didn't want to believe it, but the facts wouldn't bend. The next morning, I took a bus to the city and went to the address listed on Darren's press credentials. It was a narrow apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place that smelled like detergent and secrets. The door was slightly ajar. "Darren?" I called softly. No answer. I pushed it open. The apartment was small, one room, dimly lit by the blue glow of multiple computer monitors. On the screens were images of handwriting, samples, my handwriting, dozens of pages, blown up, analyzed, digitally reconstructed. My stomach turned. The walls were covered in pinned papers, phrases from my journals, news headlines about the trial, even the signature phrase I always used, "Signed in truth." There were printouts of the letters that had been sent to me. It was like stepping into a museum of my own life, curated by someone obsessed. A sound came from behind me, the door creaked. I turned sharply, heart in my throat. Darren stood in the doorway, pale, unshaven, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. "Talia?" he said, his voice uneven. "You shouldn't be here." "What is this?" I demanded, pointing at the monitors. "What are you doing with my handwriting?" He rubbed his forehead. "It's not what you think." "Really? Because it looks like you've turned my life into an art project." He sighed, glancing around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. "After the article, the story took off. Everyone was fascinated by you, your handwriting, the phrase, the symbolism. The public wanted more. The magazine wanted follow-ups. You could have asked me," I said coldly. "I tried," he said quickly. "But you vanished. You wouldn't return my calls. Because I wanted peace, not publicity." He nodded slowly. "I know, but then, it became something else. People started forging your letters online, fan accounts, copycats. Someone was going to do it anyway, so I thought if anyone was going to keep the story alive, it should be me." The words made me dizzy. "So you copied my handwriting? You sent those letters?" He hesitated. "Tell me the truth, Darren." "I didn't mean to scare you," he said finally. "I just wanted to keep your story relevant. The letters were marketing." My jaw tightened. Marketing. He reached for one of the envelopes on the table. "You have to understand, people were inspired by you. They saw your handwriting as a symbol of truth. I was just giving them what they wanted. You invaded my life, I said quietly. You used my pain to sell headlines. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Darren? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what Jenna did. You took something pure and twisted it for profit. He swallowed hard, guilt flickering across his face. You're right. I crossed a line. I stared at him for a long time, the air thick between us. I thought about all the nights I'd spent afraid, all the letters that had stolen my sleep, my sanity. He had done that someone I'd trusted. Delete it all, I said finally. Every file, every scan. Tonight. He nodded. I will. I turned to leave, my pulse pounding, but as I reached the door, I paused. One more thing, I said softly. If I ever see another letter in my handwriting, I won't go to the police. I'll go to your editor. His face went pale. Talia, please, I didn't let him finish. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The rain outside had started to fall again, hard and cold, washing over the city. I stood under it for a moment, letting it blur everything, the fear, the anger, the exhaustion. As I walked away, I couldn't help but glance at the streetlight's reflection in a puddle. It rippled like ink spreading across paper. I thought the story was over, but stories written in truth have a way of bleeding through. And someone, somewhere, still had a pen. The person copying my handwriting was someone I once trusted with everything. The night after confronting Darren, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the walls of his apartment, the pinned letters, the flickering monitors, the way my words stared back at me like ghosts. My handwriting, my pain, my story all stolen, repackaged, and used to feed strangers' curiosity. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but so had a cold determination. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat down at my desk, and began writing again. Not a journal entry this time, but a record, an account of what I'd seen, what Darren had said, what he'd admitted. If there was one thing I'd learned, it was this. When the world tries to erase you, write yourself back in ink. By noon, I'd written 8 pages. My hands ached, but I felt steadier. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Darren. We need to talk, please. I deleted everything, but there's something else you should know. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Meet me where this started, Carlton Plaza, 7 p.m. The same place where Jenna's empire had begun to fall. It felt right, like finishing the circle. When I arrived, the hotel lobby was just as I remembered. Polished marble floors, warm golden lights, the scent of old money. Darren was already there, waiting in a corner booth. He looked worse than before, paler, thinner, his eyes hollow. Talia, he began the moment I sat down, his voice low. I swear, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I crossed my arms. Then why did you keep going? He rubbed the bridge of his nose, trembling slightly. Because they wanted more. The editors, the network execs, even the public. The story made money, big money. They said if I didn't give them another piece, they'd replace me. So you replaced your conscience instead? He winced. I thought I was protecting your legacy. I laughed bitterly. My legacy doesn't need protecting, it needs respecting. He looked up, eyes glassy. You're right. I was wrong. But that's not what I wanted to tell you. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Someone contacted me weeks ago. Said they had access to more of your writing pages that were never published. They sent samples to prove it. It wasn't me who started sending you those letters. My chest tightened. What? They used your phrase signed in truth. Said they wanted to collaborate on a sequel to your story. I ignored them, but the letters kept coming. Then one day, I found an envelope outside my apartment. Inside was your handwriting and my address. He slid an envelope across the table. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was my handwriting again. But this time, the message was different. Truth belongs to no one. You taught me that. The paper smelled faintly of my perfume. Whoever this was, they were close enough to know the scent I used, the kind of stationery I favored, even the phrases I'd written only in my private journals. I looked at Darren, my voice shaking. "You're telling me there's someone else copying me?" He nodded slowly. "Someone with resources. Someone who doesn't want your story to end." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Then who's behind it?" He hesitated. "I think it's your publisher." My heart skipped. "I don't have a publisher." "You do now," he said grimly. "The magazine sold the rights to your story after the trial. A production company bought it for adaptation films, podcasts, books. They've been building an entire brand around you." I sat there in stunned silence. My handwriting had become a commodity, a product, and I hadn't signed a single page of it. "You have proof?" I asked. Darren nodded. "Contracts, emails?" "I'll send them." "Don't send them," I said quietly. "Bring them." He looked at me warily. "Why?" "Because I'm done playing defense." That night, I went home and pulled out one of my blank journals. I wrote a single sentence on the first page. "You can steal my words, but not my voice." Then I made a plan. The next morning, Darren arrived with a folder full of documents. They confirmed everything: the sale of my story to a media company called Greyline Productions, the use of AI-generated handwriting to reproduce my journals, and internal memos about a viral marketing strategy involving anonymous letters. It wasn't just Darren. It was orchestrated. "Why didn't you stop them?" I asked, my voice breaking. He lowered his head. "Because I was scared. They own the rights to my work too. If I spoke out, I'd lose everything." I stared at him for a long time. "You already did." He looked up, shame carved into every line of his face. "What are you going to do?" I closed the folder, my fingers brushing the embossed company logo. "What I've always done. Write the truth." That night, I sat at my desk, opened a new letter, and began to write. My hand moved with deliberate calm, each word carved in black ink like a vow. "To the editors of Greyline Productions, you have built an empire on the ink of others. You have taken my pain, my voice, and forged it for profit. Consider this your notice: your signatures were false, but mine will not be." I signed it the way I always did, signed in truth. Then I sealed it in an envelope and mailed it, not anonymously this time, but with my full name across the back flap. By morning, the letter would be on the desk of Greyline's executive director. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel afraid. Because I'd spent my whole life being mocked for my handwriting, but this time, it was going to be the last thing they ever underestimated. By sunrise, the story had turned again, but this time, the liar wasn't me. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was already buzzing. Dozens of missed calls, notifications, and messages stacked across my screen. For a second, I thought something had gone wrong. Another accusation, another headline dragging my name through mud. But when I opened the first message, I froze. Greyline Productions was trending. Someone had leaked my letter. Not just the letter itself, but the entire story. Scans of the contract Darren had shown me, screenshots of emails between executives bragging about how they'd digitized my handwriting for publicity, and voice memos from Darren confirming he'd been coerced into silence. It was all out there. And the headline was "Poetic Justice, Truth Forged, How Greyline Productions Exploited a Whistleblower's Handwriting." I read the article twice, my chest tightening with disbelief. My words were quoted everywhere. The closing line of my letter, "Your signatures were false, but mine will not be," had become the new rallying cry online. Thousands of people were reposting it, praising the courage it took to stand up to another corporation. I was suddenly trending again, but this time, it wasn't as a suspect, or a victim, or a mysterious woman with strange handwriting. It was as someone who'd fought back. Darren called me not long after. His voice was hoarse, uneven. "It's out," he said. "I can see that," I replied softly. "I didn't leak it," he added quickly. "I think one of the junior editors did. Someone who couldn't stomach the lies anymore." Then maybe there's still some honesty left in that building, I said. There was silence for a moment. Then he sighed. I know you probably hate me. I didn't answer. Hate was too small a word for what I'd felt, but also too consuming for what I felt now. I lost my job, he said finally. They fired me the second the story broke. Good, I said, my tone flat. Now you can start over without stealing anyone else's voice. He didn't argue. You were right, he said quietly. About everything. After we hung up, I stared at the phone for a long while. I wanted to feel satisfaction, maybe even victory. But what I felt instead was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you wonder if truth is ever really worth the cost it demands. By afternoon, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Greyline's stock was plummeting. Lawsuits were being filed. Public figures who had praised the production company now scrambled to distance themselves. But for me, it was all background noise. I stayed home, watching the rain streak down my window, listening to the muffled hum of the world outside. The fight was finally over, or at least, this one was. Then came the emails. Journalists wanted interviews. Publishers wanted to sign me. The woman whose handwriting had burned corporations to the ground. Some even offered ghostwriters. The irony almost made me laugh. I declined them all. I didn't want another voice telling my story. I'd already learned what happened when others tried to write for me. Instead, I did something that shocked even myself. I packed up all my journals, all the notebooks, letters, and drafts I'd hoarded over the years, and took them to a literacy nonprofit downtown. It was a small organization that taught young girls handwriting and storytelling as therapy. When I explained what I wanted to do, the director looked stunned. "You're donating all of this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Every word." "Why?" "Because words shouldn't be weapons," I said softly. "They should be bridges." She smiled a kind, quiet smile and promised they'd be preserved, studied, and shared only with my consent. For the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. But the world doesn't forget so easily. Even weeks later, my phrase, "signed in truth," had taken on a life of its own. People used it online as a hashtag, printed it on shirts, tattooed it on their skin. At first, it unsettled me. It felt like losing control again. But slowly, I began to see something else, something beautiful. They weren't mocking me anymore. They were celebrating me. Celebrating the very thing I'd been ridiculed for my whole life. One afternoon, I stopped at a cafe and noticed a young woman at a corner table, writing in a notebook. Her handwriting was messy, wild, and unrefined, but there was something alive about it. I smiled, remembering myself at that age. As I passed, she looked up and froze. "Are you Talia Gray?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yes." Her face lit up. "Your story changed my life. I used to hide my handwriting too. But after reading about you, I started writing again. For a moment, I couldn't speak." "Thank you," I finally whispered. She grinned shyly. "I always end my journal entries the same way now." She flipped her notebook around, showing me the last line at the bottom of the page. "Signed in truth." Tears pricked my eyes, but this time, they didn't sting. I left the cafe quietly, smiling to myself. My words had outlived me, spreading far beyond revenge or justice. They had become something pure again, something I'd lost sight of along the way. But that night, as I settled into bed, I caught a strange feeling in my chest. A flicker of unease, faint but undeniable. I couldn't name it until I opened my laptop and checked the news. A new article had gone live. The headline read, "Anonymous letters in signed in truth handwriting continue appearing worldwide." My smile faded. Different cities, different countries, thousands of people receiving letters signed with my phrase in handwriting eerily identical to mine. The world called it art, a tribute. But I knew better. Somewhere, someone was still writing in my name, and this time, I wasn't the one holding the pen. People say handwriting reveals the soul, but mine revealed the truth, no matter how ugly. It's been 3 years since the letters stopped coming, at least the ones addressed to me. The others, the ones still circulating out there, I've learned to live with. My name, my story, my signature, they've taken on a life of their own. Somewhere online, strangers still debate whether I was a hero or a fraud. I don't read the comments anymore. I don't need to. I know who I am, and for once, that's enough. I moved away from the city after everything. Traded glass buildings and courtroom walls for a small town on the coast, where the loudest sounds are gulls and the tide brushing the rocks. I teach now handwriting therapy at a community center. People come to me with shaky hands, unsteady hearts, and stories they're too afraid to speak. I teach them how to write instead. The irony isn't lost on me. For years, people told me my handwriting was wrong, unreadable, a flaw that made me less. Now, it's the reason people seek me out. The same looping strokes that once drew laughter now draw healing. When my students press pen to paper, I tell them, don't write neatly. Write honestly. It always makes them smile. Some afternoons, I sit by the window of the classroom, watching sunlight spill across lined paper as a student hesitantly writes her first letter to herself. I recognize the look in her eyes, that quiet fear of being misunderstood. It's the same fear that used to haunt me. And every time I see it fade, replaced by confidence, I feel something warm and unfamiliar. Peace. Maybe. But peace has edges. Last winter I received a package, no return address. Just my name written in the familiar, flowing handwriting the world now associates with me. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity is stronger than caution sometimes. Inside was a single journal, bound in deep green leather. No note. No explanation. Just words written in handwriting that mimicked mine perfectly. The pages were filled with stories, new ones. Letters written to strangers. Confessions, apologies, thank yous. But they weren't mine. They belonged to other people. Someone had collected them, compiled them, and written them in my hand. The last page simply read, "Truth doesn't belong to one person. You gave it to the world." I sat there for a long time, the journal open in my lap. Whoever had sent it hadn't meant to threaten me this time. They were continuing me, expanding what I'd started, turning signed in truth into something more than a personal vow. It had become a collective language. It should have scared me, but it didn't. Maybe because I'd spent so long fighting to keep control of my story that I'd forgotten something essential. Once you release the truth into the world, it stops belonging to you. Still, I kept the journal. It sits on my bookshelf now, next to the few I chose not to donate. Sometimes I take it down, trace the words with my fingertips, and smile. Somewhere, someone believed in what I started enough to carry it forward. I guess that's what truth really does, it replicates itself. It survives. In quiet moments, I think back to everyone who tried to bury me under lies. Jenna, Kelsey, Darren, Grayline. Each of them had their own version of truth, but none of them understood what it really meant. Truth isn't a story you sell or a weapon you wield, it's something you sign, one line at a time, with the full weight of who you are. Sometimes at night, when the wind rattles the windows, I light a candle and write. Not for evidence, not for revenge, just for the calm that comes from the scratch of pen on paper. The rhythm still soothes me. My handwriting has softened over time, less rigid, more fluid. Maybe because I've softened too. Every year, I start a new journal with the same first line. My words are my witness. And I end every one of them the same way, signed in truth. A few months ago, one of my students, a quiet woman named Amira, asked me, "Do you ever wish you could erase everything that happened?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," I said. "Because if I erased it, I'd have to erase who I became." She nodded, then smiled and wrote the words down in her notebook. The world still moves too fast for handwriting now. Most people type or dictate or swipe their stories into the void. But every time I see ink-staining fingers, I see rebellion. Every letter written by hand is an act of defiance against forgetting. I suppose that's what I've become too, a reminder that ink outlasts noise. Last week, a letter arrived at the center, addressed not to me, but to the teacher of truth. Inside was a photograph of a group of women in another country, each holding a notebook, smiling. They were survivors of corruption cases using handwriting workshops to rebuild their lives. At the bottom of the letter were 3 words written in careful looping script, signed in truth. I cried when I read it, not out of sorrow but gratitude. Because somehow, through pain and chaos, something beautiful had grown from what I started. The past will always live inside me in every curve of my pen, every page I fill. But I've learned that the truth doesn't chain you. It frees you. Now, when people ask what my story was really about, I tell them this. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about reclaiming something that no one else could forge my voice. And when I finish saying that, I always smile, pick up my pen, and write the same closing I always have. Because in the end, my handwriting didn't just sign their fate, it wrote my freedom.